All right, we are starting a very short message series today. For the next few weeks, we're going to be asking a simple question, which is this: what in the world is God doing? And follow up with that question, we're going to ask the question, where do I fit? So each week, we're going to be focusing on something different that God is doing in the world, and then asking the question, where do I fit? And today we just want to share some thoughts about China. And I know since I got back from our mission trip, I've shared a few stories with you, but I felt like it was important for us to just give you a full report of what we experienced, what we learned, and how we as connectors can participate in what God is doing in China. And this is the first thing that I want you to know. This is not on your note. Well, actually, there's nothing on your notes. But here's really what I want you to hear today. God is expanding his kingdom. God is expanding his kingdom. And he's using ordinary people like you and me to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. I think Cameron and I were both just really blown away by how God is using ordinary people who haven't been to seminary, haven't had, many of them don't have a college education whatsoever. They have just fallen in love with Jesus. They know Jesus, and they are changing the world, turning the world upside down. Ordinary people like you and me. And God's kingdom is expanding, and it's extraordinary. Cameron, how many millions of people did we say? 200 to 300 million people in China, which is about 2/3 the population of the United States. People are living for Jesus. And so we want to share with you some of the stories and our experiences in China. But I wanted to start, Cam, we have a lot of connectors who are new to our church family, who don't know you, because you moved to Texas a couple of years ago. So would you share some of your stories so people can get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello everyone. I'm a Bozeman native. I just grew up right down the road from Connect. Went to Montfort School, go Wildcats, and went to Bozeman High School, go Hawks, and graduated from Montana State. So go Bobcats. Yeah. Right? A little bit closer? There it is. All right. Thank you. I really didn't grow up in church. Had a little bit of experience with the Catholic Church here in Bozeman, and really wasn't following Jesus at all. And it was just after college, after graduating, that I was really struggling in my life. I had a lot of issues with alcohol and some drugs and just being with bad people and just not in a good spot. I had a lot of hurt in my life from my childhood, losing my father at a young age, and just not in a great place. And I was very thankful to have my sister, my baby sister, who were very close, and she just spoke truth into my life, and I was able to repent. And it took a while for me to really accept Jesus as Lord in my life, but it really started to change me. And so I was working for Chris at the hospital, and as everyone knows Chris, she's amazing, and didn't really talk about Jesus a lot, but I started to get that little bit of a curiosity, and I met Russ. He'd come take Chris out to lunch, and so I started asking, well, what's this Connect? So I showed up one Sunday, and it just so happened I was also trying to ask this very cute cafeteria girl out at the same time, and she was there that first Sunday that I showed up. And I tried to talk to her afterwards, and she ducked out the side door to try and avoid me. And that woman is my wife now. So, so it was just an amazing time. I was able to serve at Pronghorn when we were over there. Basically when the building was empty. I think we were talking about this a little bit last night. And we ended up having some issues with the water, with the well. And so I started testing the water at the well and just kind of serving randomly. Came here, started serving a little bit. And then, one day there was just a really big need at Connect for leaders and for people on staff to serve.
We had a bunch of leaders we had a leader turnover, and I remember this Sunday very clearly. I just said, we just need some warm bodies. Please, somebody volunteer.
Yeah, so I talked with my wife, and I said, I think we really should step up. It's time for us to step up. Connect's our home. And so I talked to Russ, and he threw me right into the leadership of campus operations, which I had no idea what that entailed, but that is the cleaning team, that is the lawn maintenance, that's the building maintenance. It's a big job. Those of you who know Emily, she does a fantastic job. Yes, big shout out to her. Emily was on my cleaning team. It just had an amazing time. So I was actually working for Chris, working for Russ, and working my full-time job at the time, and I just said it was too much.
Yeah,
it was way too much.
So at some point, Cam said, Russ, I'm going to have to step out. Well, at that time, Cameron was coming to our staff meetings, and he had become so valuable to us as a mentor and helping us make wise decisions. I said, Cam, I understand if you need to step out of the operations, but I still need you on our leadership team. So he has been serving ever since then in the area of leadership development. And so he mentors our leaders and our staff members and helps them. And then 2 years ago, you dropped this bombshell on me.
Yes, yeah. So my wife graduated from Montana State with an RN degree, and then we decided to move to Texas, which was a big change for all of us.
And so I asked Cam if he'll work remotely. I just didn't want to lose him from our team, and he said yes. So still, Cam is working for our team and doing a great job. So we should get to China.
Yes.
So it's always fun to talk about you, but we'll get to China. So the beginning of August, I received an email from Eugene Bach, and if you've been at Connect for any length of time, you'll remember Eugene. Eugene and his wife Mina moved to Bozeman during the COVID years. Their son was going to MSU, and Eugene has just become a very dear friend, and he reached out to me. I put a screenshot up there. I don't know if you can read it, but he was just asking me if I would be interested in coming to China for a gathering of some of the significant leaders of the underground church in China. And I got this email, I remember kind of early in the day, and as soon as Chris came home from work, I said, Chris, I've heard from Eugene. He wants me to come to China. And she looked at me without any hesitation, and she said, Russ, you have to go. And it's exactly what I felt in my spirit as well, but it wasn't really very practical for me to go. Chris and I had a couple of really big trips in 2025. This was going to be in December. I didn't know how we were going to pay for it. The church wasn't in a position to pay, but we just knew it was a yes. And so I told Eugene yes, and then the next thing that happened is I was just gripped with fear. I can't do this by myself. And Chris was out of vacation time. There was no way for her to go. So I reached out to Cameron, and I asked you to go.
Yeah, it was definitely a big shock for me. I was not expecting to get an invitation to go to China, that's for sure. But I had a similar experience with my wife Ruth. I said, Russ is asking me to go to China to meet with these underground leaders. And her and I were like, well, we can't say no. Like, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. So I said yes very quickly. I said I would take some time, but I think I'd only took a day.
Yeah, you didn't take very much time. And I was so thankful not to have to go alone. It's pretty intimidating to go to communist China, to meet in secret with a bunch of leaders who are running churches illegally. It was very terrifying, so it was good to have a buddy with me, and I'm very grateful. What did you think when we got to China? What are some of your initial memories of coming into China?
Oh man, it was, well, first we went to Hong Kong, and we spent a couple of days in Hong Kong, and we met with Eugene's wife, and we had no idea what the setting was going to be like. What were we expecting? Where were we going to go? Who were we meeting? And she dropped some little hints about, well, it's very high security, it's very stressful, everybody's going ahead to make sure it's secure. Basically, plan like your room is bugged. Act like your room is bugged. And it might be. So of course, we were just anxious. And so when we landed
and
there...
she also told us that a couple of the leaders had dreams that the communist officials had broken into our meetings and were disrupting things. So we were really on edge.
Powerful men of God that were seeing visions and stuff. So yes, I was very, very nervous. And you went first into the line of whatever it is, customs or whatever.
Passport control.
Yeah, and I'm like, come on, Russ, don't be nervous. But I'm like sitting there shaking. I'm like, wait, I'm the one that's nervous. So, yeah, but it wasn't that bad, actually.
Yeah, it was actually more difficult to get into Tokyo and back into the United States than it was to get into
100%.
China, believe it or not. And so we threw up this picture on the screen. This was the hotel we stayed in. I just want you to know that is a really, really, really photoshopped photo.
Yeah.
We didn't
didn't
take a lot of pictures because of the security while we were in China. So we pulled this off the website of the hotel. It's a pretty rundown hotel, and all the palm trees are brown. So, they're looking for tourists there. Kind of funny. And then I wanted you to know where we are. Oh, I should mention this as well. A couple of weeks ago when I was sharing some stories, we silenced the live stream. We're not doing that today. I reached out to Eugene this week and I said, is there anything we can't broadcast? He said, live stream the whole thing, it's not a problem. And so, just so you all know, I have complete freedom today to share all of this with you. And I really appreciate Eugene's attitude. But this is where we were. So all those little divisions in the nation of China, those are all the different provinces of China. We were down on this island called Hainan, which is its own province. And right down on the tip is a city called Sanya. This is where we were meeting. This is a city of 1 million people that I had never heard of before. And it's a resort. They call Hainan Island the Hawaii of China. And in particular, they market a lot to Russians. And so Russians come to vacation on the ocean and with the palm trees and all that kind of stuff. And so Eugene and his team had picked this location because we as Westerners would be able to blend in pretty much with Russians, which was weird.
Yeah, it felt like we were in a Bond movie. That's what we kept saying the whole time. All the secrecy and all these Russians around.
And the Russians are just like in the movies. They all look like they're going to deck you any minute. And so it was pretty funny. But we had a great time. And we got to Sanya. We checked into the hotel. And the first thing that Eugene told us is tomorrow morning, meet at 8 o'clock in the morning. Don't be late. We all walk into the conference room all at the same time. Before we got there, we had no schedule, we had no agenda, there was nothing printed, there was nothing public. We just did whatever Eugene asked us to do every day. And so the first morning, meet in the conference room, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we went from there. And so it was amazing. We'll get to some more stories about what we learned and who we met with in just a second. But Cam, give us a little background on Christianity in China, how Christianity came to China, and that history that informs why it's so scary to visit house churches in China.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually am not an expert on this, so you might be able to fact check me. I might be wrong, but learning all this and taking feverish notes.
Oh, well, I should probably tell them why I'm relying on you so much. So we were not allowed to have our phones in the meetings. We didn't even take laptops with us on the trip. We left them home. And so taking notes was all longhand. And Cam has better handwriting than me. So I just relied on him to take notes.
There was a lot of notes.
He took pages and pages and pages of notes. And I just soaked it all in. It was kind of awesome for me.
It was a good combo.
But
anyways, some of the early missionaries, first Robert Morrison in 1807, he was really one of the first people, it was the first person, he was a Protestant, to actually translate the Bible into Chinese, which I think is a huge feat. The translation barrier, just the writing and everything. So that really kicked off a lot of being able to grasp the Bible in China. And then J. Hudson Taylor was another really important figure back then and established a big missionary. A lot of what you'll read if you do some research, it leads back to this J. Hudson Taylor. And so they did a lot of missions work in China at that time.
And Christianity then has been in China for 200 years,
Yeah.
which I had no idea about.
Yeah, which is very interesting. But the one thing that was mentioned by Eugene, and it was super fascinating, I encourage anybody that's interested to read more into it, but it's the Boxer Rebellion. And I won't go too much into it today, But it's monumental into the way that the Chinese look at Westerners, they look at Christianity. And the Boxer Rebellion was around 1899 to 1901. And this came about by so much Western influence that was going on at the time. Plus, they were having really they were having hardships economically, so a lot of people were suffering. And Christianity actually was going in, and these missionaries were building churches, building hospitals, building schools, but they felt that Western influence was the main reason that they were suffering. So these rebels basically got together and said, let's kick out the Westerners. And it was very, very bad. The dynasty at the time also joined forces and said, yep, we'll go ahead and join you guys. And they killed thousands of missionaries.
One of the things that I came across this week was that this Boxer Rebellion was one of the largest slaughtering of Christian people in the history of Christianity. Thousands and thousands of people were martyred. And in fact, in the Eastern churches, they revere many of those Chinese Christians and the missionaries who were slaughtered. Many of them were beheaded. If you think about samurai swords just taking off heads, this is what they were doing. And many of those people are revered as saints in the Orthodox churches in the East.
Yeah, so this Boxer Rebellion didn't work out. The Westerners came in, conquered them again, and then really the collapse of China and the dynasty occurred, which made way for communism. So there was this big influx of communism plus national pride that occurred, and very strongly associated with the Western influence was Christianity. So there was definitely a deep hate that kind of started to occur at that time.
Yeah, so the Chinese people, just in the culture, are very suspicious of Christianity. They hate their Chinese brothers and sisters who have deceived Jesus and are part of the church. And so it's not just pressure from communism, it's pressure from the culture that views Christianity as being a Western influence that isn't good for China.
Yep, and there's a lot of, because of all this suffering, you can still see it today. The pastors, we met with one brother, and he didn't introduce himself, he didn't say where he was from. The first thing that he did is he stood up and kind of put his chest up and he said, "It was my honor and pleasure to go to prison for 5 years for the Lord." And that's like their mentality, is it's like the persecution of the Christian faith is like what they're extremely proud of and used to.
And really what we observed in these leaders, pastors, they call them the brothers. What we observed was that it is a badge of honor to suffer. Chinese Christians understand that if I decide to be a Christian, I will be persecuted. I will probably be arrested. I will probably go to jail. And it's a badge of honor for them to be marked with suffering of persecution. It's mind-blowing from an American perspective.
Yeah, so I won't spend too much more time on the rest of this, but after communism came in, they found that oppressing Christianity was very difficult. The more that they put pressure on them, the more Christians flourished. Yes, they flourished. So they found a way in which to try and control them by the Free Self-Patriotic Church, which Russ has talked about before.
I talked about that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but it was basically a way to say, okay, well, this is the only way to worship God is through this, and we control it. We put the pastors in.
The Chinese legal church.
Yes, and so that was the way. And if you weren't part of that, you were a terrorist or a rebel, essentially. And so that's how the house churches grew, is out of this movement. Real Christian brothers and sisters saying, this is not how Jesus works, and we need to spread the gospel the right way. So. They meet in house churches. We call it the underground church.
But they call them house churches.
Yeah, and they're really like small groups here at Connect, right? They're 8 to 10 people. They meet, they have a meal, and they don't worship. Like, you can't worship because if your neighbor hears you that's not a Christian.
Meaning singing.
Yeah, they'll turn you in. So it's very much like, hey, we're just meeting family together, and then they just share the gospel, share whatever they want to out of that.
Yes.
So
yeah.
It's really remarkable.
Yeah, but one of the things that I thought was interesting is even though these house churches are very small and and meeting in homes, not very many buildings. There have been some buildings that have been erected, but one of the things that we were impressed with was the organization. There's a hierarchy of organization even in the house churches.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Russ also kind of brought this up before, but we met with a few of the brothers, but there's really 5 in the entire country of China that are responsible for 200 million Christians, which is just remarkable.
Nobody really knows.
Nobody knows, but that's just a wild guess, and it may be even more.
But that comes from these pastors, the 5
Yeah.
that are in charge. They know who their people are, they know where their churches are, and they estimate 200 to 300 million believers in China. So these people are persecuted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Crazy persecution. Crazy person. Tell us about this first brother that we met, Cam.
Yeah, so this first brother, I think this was the same gentleman that stood up and said it's my honor to go to prison, right? And he was just a kind man, but you could tell he'd been through a lot. And he's from the western part, we don't have the map up again, but the western part of China is really, really persecuted. It's interesting to know like the different provinces kind of have different leniencies, and the western side of China is really, really bad.
I wonder, Maggie, can you bring that map that had Hainan on it?
But yeah,
Yeah, it's that one.
So like the larger regions over by Mongolia, and there's a lot of Muslims and a lot of
Yeah,
Buddhists.
over there on the western side, those all borders all the Afghanistan countries, right?
Yeah.
So predominantly Muslims over there, and so there's a lot of Chinese people who are Muslims, which is also against the law in China. But the persecution in the West is not just coming from the government, but it's coming from the Muslims. So it's very difficult in those Western provinces to live for Jesus.
So he told tons of stories, and they were very, we had to have a translator, so it was a bit difficult to get like the full illustration, but he would talk about being arrested, being hung up by shackles, and just beaten for days until they throw him into prison. And then when you go to prison, you probably weren't getting treated well after that, and a lot of brothers and sisters die after being in prison. And a lot of times they're beating them to figure out who's your lead pastor, who are these brothers.
Interrogation.
The people that we were meeting with are dying to know who they are. And so this brother was really good at escaping. They would like round everybody up, and he would just kind of slip through the grace of God and unseen out of these police's hands and run. And one time he even escaped all the way from the western part of China, all the way to Beijing, which is on the eastern side. It's a huge country.
Yeah.
Lived in Beijing for an entire year, hidden underground until
sharing
Jesus, and then he finally made his way back to the village and started over his life over again. Really remarkable individual.
Yeah. So there's another story about police who arrested a 19-year-old boy who was very influential in the house churches and was sharing Jesus with lots of people. They arrested him, and because he wouldn't give them the information that they wanted, they gave him a shovel and told him to dig his own grave. And so he dug and dug and dug. They had him stand in the grave, and then one of the officers shot a pistol. It was a blank, and it was intentional for intimidation and to terrify him, to terrify the other prisoners and anybody else who was aware of that. And of course he didn't die because it was a blank. But then they sent him to prison, where he lived in prison for 5 years, and he nearly died in that prison. So this was just another story that illustrated the persecution that these people live with.
And a lot of times they would tell prisoners, we got a lot of those different stories where the wardens would tell the prisoners to purposely beat Christians.
Yeah.
So it was really, not only were the prisoner, being a prisoner was very, very difficult, but then you had these hardened criminals coming after you every single day.
And then another story that we were told while we were there, there was an ongoing persecution of Christians in the eastern part of China, where there's a little bit less persecution. The house churches have been very successful at ministering to their communities. And so they build schools, and they provide medical care, and they're working very hard to benefit their communities. And so the officials in the eastern part of China will a lot of times overlook the activities of the house churches very different than the western provinces of China. And there's a church called Zion Church that, do you remember, I think it's a church of about 10,000 people.
Yeah, it's quite large.
And they built a building, and the officials were just allowing this to go on. And in October of this year, the Chinese government did a crackdown on the leadership of this Zion church. And 33 pastors were all arrested at exactly the same moment in different places all around the area. And so these pastors are all still in prison. You may have read some news reports. I came across one in my news feed. At Christmas time, the daughter of one of the pastors had publicly posted something on X, a message to her father who was suffering in prison. So it's very real, and these Christians never really know when the shoe is going to drop.
Yeah, absolutely. And that one in particular, the government got really upset only when they started reaching the very educational and the wealthy within that community. So they were okay with them, with the middle and lower class, but as soon as they started reaching kind of the upper class in the Communist Party, they immediately shut it off.
Well, and we were told that there are many people in the Communist Party that have come to Jesus.
That's what some of the brothers were saying.
But it's illegal. The Communist Party is officially atheist. You are required to be an atheist if you're a part of the Communist Party. And so, yeah, it gets pretty horrific. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Back to Jerusalem. I've told you about Eugene Bach. For those of you that don't know him, the organization that he leads is called Back to Jerusalem. Wonderful organization, and of course Eugene has shared a little bit about that when he's been here at Connect. We were able to learn where this organization originated, and it's a really interesting story. In the 1920s, there was a Chinese pastor. His name was Simon Zhao. And Simon believed that God was calling the Chinese church to begin planting churches in China and send missionaries westward out of China to bridge the gap of the spread of the gospel from east to west. And they came, it was Simon Zhao that came up with this name, Back to Jerusalem, because what they believe is that when the gospel has spread to every nation, every tribe and tongue, Jesus will return. Now, there's some theological problems with that idea, but this is the philosophy behind their organization. They're evangelizing everybody west of China and going back to Jerusalem. And so it's really quite incredible how they're planting churches, and you have a note here, Cam, about this pastor who was moving all the time. Tell us.
Yeah, this one I really loved. He was just a sweet, he was a little bit younger than the rest of the pastors, but a little more joyful, looked also very scared. Every single one of the brothers that came up was very, very nervous and scared. But this gentleman talked about how at one point in time he had his family, and they were living in one place and they were getting persecuted, and so they would have to just get up in the middle of the night, grab whatever they could, and run out of the house. And then they would start a life in a new spot, a new village or a new home, and then the government would come again, and he kept doing this over and over and over. And he just said that he was like, God, please stop us from moving, stop us from being persecuted. This is just exhausting while I'm trying to plant churches and trying to build your kingdom. What is going on? And he said he looked back after, God did not answer his prayer of,
Not in the way he thought.
Not that way that he thought, but he looks back on it now, and every single spot that he got chased out of now has a thriving church that's being built up. And so you can go back and look at every single place, and they have these just growing.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing story.
It is an amazing story. So I didn't get a picture. Well, I got one picture of Eugene of the back of his head. So I don't have that up on the screen, but here's a picture of some of the leaders that we got to meet. There it is. So the gentleman on the right is actually a pastor from Sweden. He's about 6'6", a giant
Denmark.
man. Denmark?
Copenhagen.
You're correct, yep. And so he was part of our group. And then this is Mina, who is Eugene's wife. So many of you will remember Mina being a part of our congregation. Well, they lived here, wonderful. And then we had never met before Mina's parents, Taisto and Adia. It took us 2 whole days to figure out those names. They're Swedish people, Taisto and Adia, and they founded the Back to Jerusalem organization. Taisto was sent by the Assemblies of God in Sweden to reach Chinese people, and they were initially stationed in Taiwan. And so they lived in Taiwan for a while, but Taisto really felt like he had a call to reach mainland China and support the Christians in mainland China. So eventually they were able to move to Hong Kong, and he partnered with another missionary, and they founded Back to Jerusalem. And this is what I want you to know about Back to Jerusalem. Their mission isn't to tell Chinese Christians how to do ministry or how to run their churches or where to send missionaries. The mission of Back to Jerusalem is very simply to come alongside and resource the mission of the Chinese house church. And so whatever they need, Back to Jerusalem supplies the need. If Chinese Christians need Bibles, they get Bibles to them. If they need training, if they have Sunday school teachers that need to be trained, they send people into mainland China to train. Whatever they need, they will help train them. And one of the remarkable stories we heard was one of the leaders that was there was Isaac Yun, and Taisto had actually helped him and his family escape China after the persecution had become so severe. You want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, absolutely. Taisto and Adia are absolutely amazing people. I miss them already.
Well, we felt like we were walking with spiritual giants.
Absolutely.
These people are giants of the faith.
And they can speak Mandarin, Cantonese, they speak Swedish, Finnish.
Crazy.
So they would just be talking to us in about 4 different languages at the same time. But Taisto was a big part of Brother Yun, also known as the Heavenly Man. And for those of you who don't know that story, it's incredible. I'm actually reading the book right now. And Isaac is actually Brother Yun's son. And so Taisto was very instrumental in getting Brother Yun out of China, as well as his family. And so Isaac, his mother and brother, it's a very long story and a very great story, but they were able to actually get into Thailand at one point. And when they were in Thailand, they still were not out of the woods or out of the jungle really yet.
Yeah.
And so at one point they were on top of a mountain, and it was a very dense jungle. And they were supposed to meet a contact point halfway down the mountain because it was so thick and so dangerous. And that contact was then going to bring them the rest of the way down to Taisto at the bottom of the mountain so that they could escape further. And they were running through the jungle and completely missed this checkpoint at one point. So here's this mother and 2 young boys standing in the jungle in the dark, not knowing where to go. And Isaac said they saw light, just a very faint, bright, and it became a little bit brighter, and it was just a little bit out in the distance. And so they just continued to follow this light down the mountainside all the way through, and they finally broke through this clearing, and Taisto was standing right in front of them.
And the light disappeared.
The light was gone.
So, if I remember right, Isaac said he believes that light was an angel.
Absolutely.
Guiding them through the
Just an incredible story.
Incredible story. So, this is what Taisto has been doing, is if somebody needs rescuing, if somebody needs a Bible, if somebody, whatever it is, Back to Jerusalem supplies those things. And then Eugene, his vision has been, how do we get missionaries into Afghanistan? How do we get missionaries into Mongolia? How do we get missionaries into India and resource them so they can live and lead people to Jesus? And Eugene has developed, it's really a brand new model of missionary work, because Eugene is such an entrepreneur. He gathers entrepreneurs to be missionaries, and they'll go into these different countries that are close to the gospel, and they start businesses that will serve the people. And then they plant churches while they're earning their own living. So Our American model of missionaries has been around for 100 years or more, in which our missionaries go over and they serve and they lead and then they come back. We have missionary guests all the time, and what do we ask you to do? Pray for them and give them money, right? Eugene's missionaries don't do that. They don't have the luxury of doing that, so they start businesses. And one of the things Eugene shared, and I didn't even know this until we were in the meetings, Eugene shared that the last time he was here in Montana, Chris and I took them to Yellowstone and we showed them all over the park, and we had dinner in West Yellowstone at a little barbecue joint. And Eugene, I remember this very clearly, he became very interested in the business model of this barbecue joint. So he interviewed the business owner, found out that every night he goes home and he puts the brisket on the smoker. It smokes while he sleeps, and then he opens up his shop about 4 in the afternoon. He works a few hours, and then he goes home and starts all over again, leaving plenty of time for somebody who used that model to lead a church and share Jesus with people. And so, was it 4 or 5?
I think it was 4 or 5. I can't remember either.
4 or 5 different Chinese missionaries now have barbecue businesses in India. In India. And not only that, but then he taught another entrepreneur to manufacture the smokers. And that's his business in India, supplying the barbecue joints. And so I just felt so honored that Eugene shared this with everybody, and it was a wonderful story. So I love that. So this is what the Back to Jerusalem ministry does. And then before we wrap up, we wanted to share with you how important the Bible is in China and the great need for Bibles.
Yeah, so with Bibles, there's sometimes just the only way that they're able to learn about Jesus, because these pastors that maybe are literate and are being trained or have been, walking with the Lord for a long time, they need to go to other parts and providences. So the only method is to learn from the Word. And sometimes they're sharing Bibles, one Bible in 1,000 believers. So they need to memorize, and it's just very, very difficult. So
I want to say it was in the 60s maybe, or the 70s, the communist government made the Bible, owning a Bible illegally. And so they systematically destroyed all the Bibles that had been printed, and Chinese Christians had Bibles since the 1800s, but the communist government destroyed them all.
yeah.
And so Christians have a very difficult time finding Bibles.
Yeah, so the model has always been, for a long time, smuggling Bibles in. And so we met one of the families. It was a husband and wife, and the wife's mother was actually just a monumental figure in smuggling in Bibles. Like, she was the godfather, godmother of smuggling them in. Like, everybody in China knows who this woman is. And so she passed that along to her daughter and her son-in-law. And they have been doing a fabulous job. Turns out they've actually passed it on to their kids now, which is great. But the husband didn't actually realize it was even illegal to hand out Bibles at one point. And the police stopped him and asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Hand out Bibles." And they said, "You're going to have to come with us." They held him for 8 months in a black site. Family didn't know where he was. And then they put him in prison for 5 years. And so he definitely knows now that that is illegal. But
and I have to do a shout out. Cindy Camps, didn't you smuggle Bibles into China? Am I remembered correctly? Yeah, so good job, Cindy, on mission, helping Chinese people.
Yeah, so, there's just one really big example that's pretty neat is Project Pearl back in the 80s, and they actually built a giant barge, and it was custom to store 1 million Bibles in it. And they took this barge with this tugboat, and they rammed it up onto the shore and on the beach, and then all of these Christians just kind of ran out onto the beach and grabbed all the Bibles, and they were able to unload it in about 2 hours. Tons and tons of Bibles. And those were distributed all over China. And a lot of stories go back to that Project Pearl.
And then this is one of the things that I loved learning about. Eugene shared with us that in the early days, it was all about smuggling Bibles. If somebody had a car, they would pack the car full of Bibles and they would drive it across the border and pray for God to close the eyes of the authorities. And then they figured out that it was a lot more efficient to print Bibles illegally in China. And this is what they do now. And you kind of got an understanding of how this works.
Yeah, a little bit. So they kept mentioning the third shift at these manufacturers.
The third shift.
Yeah, and so we're like, what is this? And so first shift is like where the real Nikes come out. The second shift is where like the fake Nikes come out at the same manufacturer.
Same manufacturer.
And third shift is illegal stuff that comes out. So all of this one plant will actually produce all of these different things. And so they print all these Bibles in third shift.
Yeah, so Back to Jerusalem has made agreements with printing presses who will print the illegal Bibles. I don't understand how it works, because Eugene also shared with us that printing presses in particular are inspected by the communist government 3 times a week, and yet they're shipping out Bibles out the back door. They copy the shipping boxes from something else so it doesn't look like Bibles, but this is the most effective method of getting Bibles to Christians now. But, and we're going to segue here shortly, but what they need is the funds to print Bibles. And so that's really one of the things that's really important now, is because they're doing the printing in China. Money is important. How are we doing time-wise?
I was going to say, how are we doing?
All right. Let me just share this briefly. One of the things that was really emotional for me was when these brothers, these pastors, would get up to share with us. They would almost uniformly say the same thing. They would say, please tell your people thank you for sending the missionaries to China to bring the good news of Jesus to China. They are looking back 200 years, and they still are so full of gratitude, because Jesus is the central figure of their lives. And they know that without those missionaries, hundreds of years ago, 200 years ago, that made all those sacrifices, the message of Jesus may never have gotten to China. So they just keep wanting to say thank you. But the other thing that really moved me was they would say, thank you, tell your churches thank you for sending the missionaries to bring us the beautiful gospel. Thank you for bringing the beautiful gospel. And that phrase just rings in my heart. In fact, in February, we're going to launch our spring teaching series, because it'll be spring in February, don't you think?
Right.
But we're going to call this teaching series The Beautiful Gospel. We're going to talk about what the gospel is, how to share the gospel, how to know how to share this beautiful truth that has saved our lives with people. And I just wanted to share with you briefly the different strategies that Chinese people use for sharing the gospel. In spite of this intense persecution, Christian people in China are sharing with their family members and their neighbors every single day. This is what the Lord did for me. These are people who pray and they fast. And if there's a need, they go to the Lord and they ask the Lord for a miracle. And one of the things that I got from these stories was one of the reasons that so many people are coming to Jesus, one of the reasons that people are turning into this very difficult life of walking with Jesus in China is because the Lord does miracles all the time. People are seeing signs and wonders take place. We heard a story of one pastor whose daughter, I think the daughter was about 3 years old, and she fell sick in public. And the pastor and his wife just got down on their knees. They were miles and miles away from any kind of medical care, so they just began to pray and cry out to the Lord, and all the people in their village were watching them pray to the Lord. Finally, an ambulance came and took her to the hospital, and the whole village expected her to die. I think she was having seizures.
Yeah, they actually came to grieve. They kept bringing gifts to the house.
The village people kept bringing
For a long time.
Yeah. And then when they found out that that God had healed their daughter, all these people came to know Jesus. And so one of the things, one of the strategies for sharing the gospel that we learned was, man, just tell people what God has done in your life. Tell people how Jesus has changed you, how Jesus has saved you, how Jesus has healed you, the miracles Jesus does in your life. This is what changes people. I think sometimes, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I get on my soapbox. I think sometimes we're afraid to share Jesus because we feel like we don't know the Bible well enough. Well, listen, nobody in China knows the Bible well enough. They just know that God is alive and God does good stuff. And they share the story, and the gospel is spreading like wildfire. And Cam, I have to have you share the story. You're doing this in your everyday life. I love this.
Well, I'll preface this by saying I am not very good at this either, but I try every once in a while. And it was just funny because we were working on this week, and I was trying to think of examples in my life of how I've done this. And actually, I was coming to Bozeman, and I arrived early at the Austin airport, and I was like, I'm gonna have a beer. It's Friday, and so I go to the bar, and I just sit down and order a drink. And I heard these gentlemen talking, and one was in medical device, which is my realm. So I just struck up a conversation, and we started talking. And then he said, "Well, where are you going, Bozeman? Why are you going there?" To talk about China. And it just sparked up this whole conversation about Jesus. And by the time I knew it, I had the entire airport bar talking about Jesus. Like, there were probably 10 people all around, and other people at the other side of the bar looking over like, what are they talking about? And yeah, it was just fabulous. And I would kind of steer the conversation if they got a little wily, like, well, all gods are, all religions are the same. I'm like, well, hold on. But other than that, it was very much just like, okay, let them talk. And I got up, I said, God bless you, I hope you have a safe flight. And I walked away, and I remember listening to them, and they're going, how did we start talking about Jesus? And then they kept talking about Jesus as I left, so they kept the conversation going. Hopefully more people got to hear about Jesus.
And the other reason I love this story, Cam, is because I think the other intimidation we feel is sometimes we just feel like if we don't close the deal, we've failed.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says some people plant, some people water, some people get to have the harvest. And so right there in the airport, you were planting seeds. Somebody else is going to water those seeds, and somebody will get to harvest. Our job is just talk about Jesus. This trip has really lit a fire under me to talk about Jesus more. Why? Because Jesus is a central figure of my life. Jesus has changed my life. Jesus is the reason I live. And why wouldn't I want to share that with people who don't know Jesus yet? And so that's good. Okay, let's return to the question that I asked right at the beginning, which was, what in the world is God doing? And where do I fit? Let me just share with you where we can fit. Again and again and again in our meetings in Sanya, these pastors asked us to pray. They asked us to pray for two things very specifically, and I just want to invite you, and we'll pray here before we're done today. Would you make a commitment to pray for Chinese Christians in two perspectives? One, pray for the leaders who are under so much pressure. In many parts of China, particularly in the western provinces, every home has a QR code on the door. And the Chinese officials know who goes in those doors and who goes out. They know everything you're doing. One pastor shared with us that he was arrested, and they were asking him about visiting a city that was very far away. And when he wouldn't give them the answers they want, they pulled up a whole file with pictures of everywhere he'd been in that particular city. The pressure's amazing. And the pastors need our prayer for strength and courage and tenacity to continue the work of the ministry. Then the other prayer request is for young Christians. These pastors are aware that there are new leaders coming up. We got to meet some very young leaders. They're very different. And there's just a concern that some of these leaders are going to want to get out of China. They just want to get to a place where they're going to be more comfortable. Excuse me. And the pastors want us to pray that the Lord will continue to send young people for the harvest and for this mission of spreading the gospel throughout China and westward, all the way back to Jerusalem. So we'll pray about that in just a moment. But the other area, if you would like to be a financial support to Back to Jerusalem. This was something that was new to me. Whenever Eugene is here, it's so interesting because he doesn't ask for money from us. I've never met a missionary who wasn't asking for money. But the Back to Jerusalem ministry has been largely supported by very wealthy donors for a long time. And the Lord has just recently shown their leadership team that they need to broaden their base. And so they've started a ministry called Gatekeepers. And so if you're interested in helping financially to support the ministry of printing Bibles and distributing Bibles, you can go to backtojerusalem.com, and then you can see that tab up there at the top that's red called Gatekeepers. You can sign up there, you'll get a newsletter. Do you remember what it costs monthly?
I think it's $25 a month, and you get newsletters. I think they send you free books, and they keep you updated on all the mission work that's going on in all the different countries, like bi-weekly.
Yeah. So if you'd like to be a gatekeeper, just do that. And I made a commitment, and I've talked with some of our leaders. Not all of our leaders know this, so don't freak out on me if you don't know. Connect Church is going to become a gatekeeper. We're going to support Back to Jerusalem financially, which we've never done before. So I'm really excited about that. So that's where you can fit in. I also want to mention, Eugene is very proud. We are the only church he visits that has a dedicated cupboard for just Back to Jerusalem stuff. And so whenever he comes, he ships all kinds of books and merch. And so Chris dug that all out today, and if you want some merch, they give it all away. It's just free. So there's several books back there. There's a couple pandas that just help your kids remember to pray for China. And so pick the merch up. There's not a lot of it left, but Eugene's going to have to come soon and refresh our supply. So that's what we want to share.